I never imagined this would happen. I always thought family was supposed to be the one place where you could count on love and support, no matter what. But Thanksgiving 5 years ago proved me wrong. My name is Emily Walker, and I'm 30 years old. That year, on Thanksgiving, my parents told me to leave. Just like that. No explanation, no chance to talk. I was out of their lives, just like that. I stood there in shock, my heart pounding in my chest as my parents, the people who had raised me, looked at me with cold, indifferent eyes. They didn't even try to stop me. They didn't care. I didn't know what had happened, or why this was happening. All I knew was that my world, the one I had built my entire life around, had just crumbled in front of me. It was supposed to be a time for family to come together, for warmth and love to fill the room. Instead, it was the moment I felt the most alone. I had always thought my parents would have my back, that they would always be there for me, but that night, everything changed. I don't remember what they said exactly, but I remember the finality of it. The door closed behind me, and I was on my own. No calls, no messages, just silence. I tried to reach out, but there was no response. For 5 years, I didn't hear from them, not a word. Every Thanksgiving, every holiday after that, I spent them alone, wondering if things would ever change, wondering what I did wrong. But no matter how much I missed them, I couldn't bring myself to go back. I couldn't face the rejection again. And yet, somehow, here I was, standing in front of the house I grew up in, 5 years later, about to walk through that door once more. I never thought I would come back, not after everything that happened. But they called me. My parents. They invited me back for Thanksgiving. At first, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know if I was ready to face them again. But the truth is, I didn't know what else to do. So, I agreed. I wasn't sure if I was making a mistake, but I had to know what was going on. What had changed? Why no? Why after all this time? I had so many questions, and a part of me was still hoping for that reconciliation. But as I walked towards the door, I had no idea that I was about to walk into something far more complicated than I ever imagined. As I stepped inside the house, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking filled the air. It almost felt like nothing had changed. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet, just like they always did. The photos on the wall, the little knickknacks scattered around, everything seemed the same. But there was something off, something I couldn't put my finger on. My heart was racing as I made my way into the living room, where my parents were sitting. They looked up when I entered, their faces blank, like they hadn't seen me in years. My mom's eyes flickered for a moment, but there was no warmth there. My dad simply nodded. "Emily, it's been a while," he said, his voice flat. I couldn't believe how different it felt. The family I had once known and loved now felt like strangers. I stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to say. I had expected something, some sign of warmth, but there was none. I sat down on the couch, trying to act normal, trying to pretend like everything was okay, but inside, I was falling apart. The silence between us was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't really welcome here. After a few minutes, my mom stood up and motioned toward the dining table. "Dinner's ready," she said, as if this were just any other Thanksgiving. I followed them to the table, trying to push the growing sense of unease aside. As we sat down, I noticed that the conversation was stiff, forced. My dad asked me about work. My mom asked if I'd been seeing anyone, but there was no real interest in my answers. It was also superficial. My mind kept racing, and I couldn't help but wonder why they had invited me back after all this time. What had changed? Why no? My stomach churned as I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take the awkwardness anymore, my mom spoke again, but this time, her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we invited you here for a reason." The room seemed to freeze. I looked at her, waiting for her to continue, my heart pounding in my ears. What did she mean by that? Why had they really invited me back? Was it for forgiveness? Or was there something else? I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and I knew that whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be good. My mom's voice broke through the silence again, and this time, I could hear a hint of hesitation. "We need your help, Emily, she said, her words heavy with an unspoken weight. My stomach dropped. This was it. This was why they had invited me back. I had suspected it, but hearing it out loud was a shock to the system. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as if I were afraid to hear the answer. My mom exchanged a quick glance with my dad, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of something in their eyes, something like guilt, but I couldn't be sure. Finally, my dad spoke, his tone as calm as ever, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. We've run into some financial trouble, he said, his words slow and deliberate. And we need your help to get out of it. I sat there, stunned, the words echoing in my head. Financial trouble? After 5 years of silence, they were asking me for money? My hands tightened around my fork, and I could feel the blood rush to my face. How could they think I would just help them after everything that happened? How bad is it? I finally managed to ask, though I was dreading the answer. My dad sighed, leaning back in his chair, and my mom looked down at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. It's bad, she admitted. We've made some poor investments, and now we're struggling to keep the house. We need money, and we need it fast. My chest tightened as I listened, but I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to scream, to ask why they had to wait until now to ask for help, why they had thrown me out in the first place. But another part of me felt sorry for them. I hated that part of me, but it was still there. So, what do you need from me? I asked, my voice trembling slightly, though I tried to keep it steady. My mom looked up then, her eyes searching mine. We need you to give us some money, Emily. Your dad's pension is not enough, and we can't keep the house without help. I could feel my heart racing, the anger building up inside me. How could they be so shameless? After everything they had done, now they were asking me for help? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I sat there, looking at my parents, the people I had once loved unconditionally, and realized that the only thing I had left for them now was disappointment. As I sat there, the weight of their request pressing down on me, I couldn't believe what was happening. My parents, the people who had kicked me out without a second thought, were now asking me for help. After everything that had happened, the hurt, the abandonment, they wanted money from me. They didn't even apologize, didn't even try to explain why they had done what they did. It was as if nothing had ever happened, as if 5 years of silence and rejection meant nothing. I stared at them, my mind racing. How could they do this? How could they ask me for money after treating me like I was invisible for so long? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. The anger was there, bubbling just below the surface, but I refused to let it show. I had spent so long being angry, being hurt, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep feeling that way anymore. But this was different. This was my parents, asking for something that felt more like a demand than a request. I wanted to tell them no, to walk out the door and never look back, but a part of me, the part that had always hoped for reconciliation, was still hanging on. I looked down at my hands, my fingers nervously twisting the napkin on my lap. How much do you need? I asked, my voice softer than I had intended. It felt like a question I would regret asking, but it came out before I could stop it. My mom's eyes lit up for a brief moment, like she had won something, but the relief in her face was short-lived. She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, I felt like she was calculating something in her head. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady, but tinged with desperation. We need at least $50,000, she said. My heart dropped. $50,000. How could they possibly think I had that kind of money? I had been struggling, just like everyone else. I had my own bills to pay, my own life to figure out. I stared at them, unsure of what to say next. I didn't know if I should be angry, sad, or just numb. $50,000 was a lot of money, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized they had never once considered what it would take for me to get to this point. My mom looked at me expectantly, waiting for a response, but I had none. I just sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of everything. How could I go from being the person they threw out of their lives to the one they needed to save them? I couldn't help but wonder if this was what they had been planning all along. Were they waiting for me to fail, to be desperate enough to come crawling back? Was this some kind of game to them? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever I decided, it wouldn't be easy. As I sat there, listening to the silence between us, the weight of the conversation began to settle in. My mind was racing, and I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had led to this moment. $50,000. It felt like an impossible sum to just hand over, especially after everything that had happened. My parents had thrown me out without hesitation, without explanation, and now they were asking for help. How had we gone from a family that once shared everything to a family where trust no longer existed? My hands tightened around my glass, the coolness of the water doing little to calm the storm inside me. My mom's eyes were fixed on me, waiting for some sign, any sign, that I would offer them the money they so desperately needed. I wanted to scream. To tell them how unfair this all was. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I couldn't just give it away. The betrayal, the rejection, it all came rushing back. I had spent years building my own life, trying to move on from the hurt they had caused me, and now they wanted to tear that all down. But as much as I wanted to fight, to refuse them, something inside me hesitated. Maybe it was the part of me that still longed for the family we once were. Maybe it was the guilt. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. I don't have that much, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mom's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. You must have something saved up. You've been doing well, right? She asked, her voice a mix of hope and expectation. I shook my head, the lump in my throat growing with each passing second. I don't have that kind of money, I repeated, this time more firmly. I can't help you. The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest, but they also left a hollow feeling behind. I wanted to say more. I wanted to explain why I couldn't help them, why I couldn't just forgive and forget. But there was nothing I could say that would make this situation any less painful. My parents, the people who had raised me, were now strangers asking for something I couldn't give. And as much as I wanted to believe they had changed, that they regretted what they had done, I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. I stood up, feeling the tension in the room thickening. I'm sorry, I said quietly, my voice breaking. I just can't do this. And with that, I turned and walked away, not looking back. I didn't know where my life was headed, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer part of the family I had once known. As I walked out of that house, the door closing softly behind me, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The weight that had been crushing my chest for the past hour lifted, but it left something far heavier in its place. A deep sense of loss. I had spent so long holding on to the idea of family, but now, walking away from my parents, I realized that the family I once knew was gone. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I didn't know where I was going or what I was supposed to do next. I didn't even know if I would ever speak to them again. The silence between us was final, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it. I had always tried to believe that things could be fixed, that I could somehow make things right, but now I understood. Some things don't change. Some people don't change. As I got into my car and drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. I had been cast aside, left to pick up the pieces of my life alone, and now they were asking for my help, as if nothing had ever happened. I couldn't help but wonder if they had expected me to just fall back into line, to forgive them and give them what they wanted. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had changed, just like they had. I didn't want to be angry, but I couldn't deny the resentment that had built up inside me over the years. I had been forced to live without them, to rebuild my life without their support, and now they wanted me to come back and fix their problems. I couldn't do it. It wasn't just about the money, it was about everything they had taken from me, everything they had failed to give me. I had spent so long feeling like I wasn't enough for them, and now I realized I had been enough all along. I had to learn to take care of myself, to stop waiting for their approval, their love, their validation. It hurt more than I could put into words, but I knew it was the only way forward. As I drove down the road, the familiar streets of my childhood slipping away in the rearview mirror, I knew I was leaving more than just my parents behind. I was leaving the past behind, and it was the hardest thing I had ever done. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a fog. It wasn't the first time I had felt like this, but it was the first time I understood the depth of it. The emptiness was suffocating, like I was missing something important, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I kept replaying that moment when I walked out of their house, the door shutting behind me, the finality of it all. But as I spent more time alone, the confusion started to clear. I wasn't just missing my parents. I was missing the version of myself that I had been when I still believed in them, when I thought family meant something more than just blood. I had spent so many years trying to hold on to the idea of family, trying to fix things that weren't really broken in the first place. I had invested so much of myself into trying to make them proud, into earning their love and approval. But I never got it. And now I was standing at the edge, realizing that all of that had been for nothing. They didn't need me to fix their lives. They needed me to fix their mistakes. And that was not my responsibility. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on fixing everything for everyone else that I forgot about myself. I was so used to being the one to step in, to smooth things over, to make sure everything was okay. But no one had ever done that for me. No one had ever made sure I was okay. And that had to change. For the first time in my life, I had to put myself first. I wasn't sure how to do that or where to start, but I knew I had to begin somewhere. I had to stop living for them and start living for me. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I knew it was the only way forward. I couldn't keep looking back at the past, at the family I thought I knew. I had to build something new, something that was mine. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I moved forward. And that was enough for me to finally take the first step away from everything I had once known. As the weeks went by, I began to find a new rhythm in my life. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but the more I focused on myself, the more I started to understand what it meant to truly heal. I filled my days with work, friends, and things that brought me peace. The hole in my heart, the one I had tried to fill with my family's love and approval for so many years, was slowly being filled with something else, something that was entirely my own. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked out of their house. I had learned, painfully, that I couldn't rely on them anymore, and that was okay. For so long, I had tied my sense of worth to their approval. If they didn't love me, then I must have been unworthy of love. But now I knew better. The love I had for myself had to come first. One afternoon, I was sitting in a coffee shop, sipping my drink, when I got a message from my mom. At first, I thought about ignoring it. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another conversation with her, but something inside me told me to open it. The message was short, just a few lines. I know things have been difficult. I've thought a lot about what happened. I'm sorry. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to respond with everything I had felt in the last few weeks: anger, hurt, betrayal. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger in the time since I left, knew that it wasn't the time for that. I wasn't sure what I wanted from them anymore. I didn't know if I wanted to go back to the way things were, or if I even could. But I did know one thing. I didn't need their approval to be happy. I didn't need them to validate me anymore. So, I replied, simply, "Thank you for the apology. I'm doing well." And that was it. There was no grand reconciliation, no sweeping forgiveness. But that moment felt like a turning point. I had acknowledged their apology, but more importantly, I had acknowledged my own growth. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked out of their house. I had learned to stand on my own 2 feet, to find strength within myself that I didn't know was there. I didn't need them to define me anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It had been a few months since I received that message from my mom, and as time passed, I realized just how much I had changed. I no longer felt the urge to look back, to wonder if things could have been different. I had found peace in myself, something I never thought I would find. Life, in its quiet and sometimes overwhelming way, had moved on. I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive my parents for what they had done, but I wasn't angry anymore. The anger I had clung to for so long had dissolved, and in its place, I found a sense of clarity. I had finally learned how to live for me. I took a long walk one afternoon, something I had started doing regularly to clear my mind. As I walked through the park, I noticed how much I had missed this. The simple act of taking time for myself, of enjoying the present, was something I had forgotten how to do in the years leading up to everything that had happened. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I took it out, half expecting it to be a reminder or an email I needed to deal with. But it wasn't. It was a text from my mom. "I understand if you don't want to talk right now, but I wanted to say again that I'm sorry for everything. I love you." I stared at the screen for a moment, not sure how to respond. It was simple, it was honest, and it was the kind of message I had always wanted to hear from her. But it was also a reminder of how much time had passed, of everything that had been broken and could never be fully repaired. I took a deep breath before replying. "I appreciate your apology. I'm doing okay, Mom." And that was it. The conversation ended there, but something in me felt lighter after that exchange. It wasn't the grand resolution I had once imagined, but it was enough. It was the closure I didn't know I needed. I had no desire to go back to the way things were. I didn't need to fix everything or to make sense of it all anymore. I had found my own path, one that didn't involve seeking approval from anyone but myself. I was free, truly free, for the first time in a long time. And with that, I finally let go of the past, knowing that the future was mine to shape. It was a few months after that brief exchange with my mom when I realized something had shifted within me. The emptiness I once felt was no longer suffocating. I had started filling that void with experiences of my own choosing, not dictated by what I thought my family expected from me. There were moments, small and fleeting, when I allowed myself to feel proud of the progress I had made. I was no longer the person who relied on approval or validation from anyone. I was learning to find my worth in the things I loved, in the things I did, and in the relationships I chose to nurture. It wasn't always easy, and there were still days when the old hurt resurfaced, but I had learned how to handle those moments without letting them consume me. I had built a new life for myself, one that didn't include the constant tension of trying to meet other people's expectations. I had made new friends, pursued hobbies I had once abandoned, and found comfort in the quiet moments alone, knowing that I was enough. There were still times when I thought about my parents, but it was different now. I no longer carried the burden of wishing for a different past. I accepted it for what it was. I had let go of the fantasy of a perfect family, and in doing so, I had opened myself up to the possibility of creating a life that was just as fulfilling, even without their presence. I realized I didn't need their approval, and I didn't need their love to feel complete. I had everything I needed within myself. That thought was both liberating and empowering. One evening, as I was sitting in the park watching the sunset, I thought about how far I had come. The person I had been 5 years ago, the one who had walked out of that house, felt like someone else entirely. I was stronger, more confident, and finally at peace with who I was. For the first time, I could see the future ahead of me without the weight of the past holding me back. And as I sat there, watching the last of the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I had found something far more important than the love I had once longed for. I had found the love and acceptance I had been searching for all along within myself. The more time passed, the more I realized how much of my life I had spent trying to repair something that wasn't broken in the first place. I had spent years trying to fix my family, trying to make them see me the way I had always wanted to be seen. I had been so focused on their approval that I lost sight of who I was. But now, that focus had shifted. I wasn't trying to fix anyone anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to come around and offer me their validation. I was enough, just as I was. And the freedom that came with that realization was incredible. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was living for myself. There was no one to answer to, no expectations to meet, no need to prove anything. I could just be. I could be happy without needing permission. I spent more time with my friends, building relationships that felt genuine and supportive. It was amazing to see how much love and kindness existed in my life when I stopped looking for it from people who couldn't give it. I even started picking up hobbies I had abandoned long ago, like painting and hiking. It felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that I had forgotten in the chaos of trying to keep my family together. Every step I took, every moment I spent on my own terms, felt like progress. I wasn't sure what the future would look like, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I had built a life for myself, and that was all I needed. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was free. One day, as I walked through the park, I found myself thinking back to everything that had happened. how much pain I had endured, how many times I had questioned myself, wondering what I had done wrong. But now, I saw it all differently. The pain had been real, but it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone who had learned how to stand on their own. And the weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. I was no longer tied to the past. I was free to move forward, to create my own path. And with that freedom, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. It wasn't the peace I had once hoped to find in my family. It was a peace that came from within, from knowing that I was enough just as I was. It had been several months since I last heard from my parents, and as time passed, I began to realize just how far I had come. The things that used to matter, the things I thought would always define me, family, approval, validation, were no longer what I was living for. I had built a life for myself, one that was free from the weight of expectations. The peace I felt now wasn't just a quiet absence of conflict, it was the kind of peace that came from deep within. I had stopped looking for approval from people who didn't understand me. I had stopped trying to fix something that wasn't broken on my end. For the first time, I felt like I was living my life the way I was supposed to, on my own terms. I had a new sense of freedom, one that wasn't about doing whatever I wanted, but about knowing that I had the power to make choices that were right for me. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I missed the family I once dreamed about. I missed the idea of the family, the holidays, the traditions, but I no longer mourned what was lost. I had learned that sometimes, the things we hold on to the tightest are the things we need to let go of the most. And in letting go, I found a version of myself I had been too afraid to embrace for years. One evening, I found myself standing by the window, watching the sunset. The colors in the sky were beautiful, and for a moment, I felt at peace. I realized that I had spent so much time waiting for something to change in my family, but the real change had to come from within me. It wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about waiting for them to apologize or offer me something I needed. It was about me taking ownership of my life and my happiness. I had learned to create my own family, one built on the friendships I had made, the connections I had nurtured, and most importantly, the relationship I had developed with myself. The road I had walked to get here hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. I no longer felt defined by my past, by the mistakes and the heartbreaks. I had learned to let go of the weight of it all. And as I stood there, watching the world around me, I felt the most peaceful I had ever felt. I had found my way. And for the first time, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be.